Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the idea of,
Goodly.
right, bujlead, which means glass heart. And I think a lot of people are familiar with this term.
Yeah.
But we're going to go a little bit deeper today. We're going to look at what it really means and how it can actually show up in your life.
Yeah, it's funny because in the West we talk about sensitivity and being sensitive,
Right.
but glass heart kind of implies something a little more extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. And the source that we're diving into today is some excerpts from a video transcript called For EOSA, which means 4 ways to overcome a glass heart. And it really does jump into that. It
Yeah.
doesn't just talk about someone who's sensitive, it talks about someone who is deeply impacted by everything around them.
Mm.
The weather, sounds, other people's moods,
Mm.
all of it just kind of sends them on these huge emotional swings.
Yeah, they really emphasize that instability in the source. It's like this constant emotional roller coaster. You're going from like extreme happiness to extreme sadness. And there's this one line that really stuck with me. They say, the same knife cutting on someone else doesn't hurt, but cutting on you takes half your life.
Wow. Now that's an intense analogy.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comparison or?
I think it speaks to the way that people with glass heart experience the world.
Yeah.
It's like this heightened sensitivity
Right.
where even little things can feel so overwhelming,
Yeah.
so painful.
That makes sense. And speaking of overwhelming, the source actually lists 10 signs that you might have a glass heart.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And some of these are going to sound familiar,
Okay.
but we're going to dig a little deeper and kind of unpack what's really going on beneath the surface.
Interesting. Okay.
So the first few signs really focus on that emotional volatility that we talked about.
Okay.
So you've got that constant emotional roller coaster, up and down, difficulty maintaining any kind of stability.
Yeah.
And then they talk about tear incontinence,
Caring con.
which is essentially just crying really easily at the drop of a hat, whether you're angry or happy or sad.
Yeah.
They even say crying before an argument even starts.
Oh my gosh, I've done that.
Right. It's like
Yeah.
anticipation of conflict is enough to bring on the waterworks.
I know.
Okay, so we've got the emotional ups and downs. We've got the tears. Another sign they mention is low self-esteem.
Oh, interesting.
So do you think that's a direct result of having a glass heart, or could it be a contributing factor?
I think it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
If you're constantly feeling hurt and overwhelmed by the world around you,
Yeah.
it's easy to start doubting yourself,
Right.
and thinking that you're not good enough.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, if you already struggle with low self-esteem, you might be more susceptible to taking things personally and feeling overly sensitive.
It's like a vicious cycle. The
Exactly.
sensitivity leads to low self-esteem, which then fuels further sensitivity.
Mm-hmm. And that cycle can also really impact your decision-making.
Right.
The source talks about how people with glass heart often struggle with being indecisive because they lack confidence in their own judgment, and they're easily swayed by what other people think.
Yeah. If you can't trust your own gut, it's easy to see how that could lead to some pretty frustrating outcomes.
Definitely.
And speaking of frustration, that actually leads us to another sign on the list: low frustration tolerance.
Ah, that makes sense.
Right. Because if even small setbacks feel really devastating, it's going to be so much harder to push through challenges and achieve your goals.
Yeah. I mean, the source even argues that this can lead to settling for less in life and never really reaching your full potential.
And that's kind of a sad thought, to think that your sensitivity could be holding you back from what you're capable of.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really is. And it's not just your personal goals that can be affected either. The source also talks about how having a glass heart can really impact your relationship.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It can create so much insecurity. Like you're constantly overthinking things, reading into every little word and action.
Right.
And that just leads to all this drama and conflict.
Yeah. That makes total sense. I mean, if you're already hypersensitive to everything,
Yeah.
it's probably like times 10 in a romantic relationship.
Oh, absolutely. And the source actually makes a specific point of saying that for women especially, having a glass heart can make them vulnerable to manipulation by, basically players.
Yeah.
Guys who aren't sincere.
Oh, so because of their tendency to be maybe overly trusting and forgiving, they end up in relationships that aren't actually healthy for them.
Right. And that kind of goes hand in hand with another sign they mentioned earlier, that sensitivity to gossip.
Right.
It's like you're so worried about what other people think that you end up living for their approval instead of your own.
And that can be so exhausting.
It is.
It's like you're constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do the wrong thing.
It takes so much energy to constantly monitor yourself like that
Yeah.
and try to please everyone.
Which actually brings us to the final two signs on the list.
Okay.
Number 9 is that low frustration
Which
tolerance.
we touched on earlier.
But it's worth digging into a little bit deeper here because
Yeah.
it's not just about getting upset easily, it's about giving up easily when things get tough.
Hmm.
And that ultimately prevents you from reaching your full potential.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that feeds directly into sign number 10, which is constantly comparing yourself to others and feeling inadequate.
Right.
It's like you're always looking outward for validation instead of finding it within yourself.
Which is a recipe for unhappiness.
Totally.
Okay, so we've covered all 10 signs of a glass heart.
Mhm.
And it's pretty clear that this level of sensitivity can be a real obstacle in life. But the good news is the source doesn't just leave us hanging.
Okay.
They offer some practical advice on how to cultivate dunyeonli,
Okay.
which they translate as the power of insensitivity or emotional resilience.
Right. And I know insensitivity sounds a little harsh,
Yeah.
but it's not about becoming like completely unfeeling.
Hmm.
It's about learning to detach from the things that don't truly matter and not letting them control your emotions.
So it's more about building a thicker skin, so to speak?
Exactly. It's about developing that inner strength and resilience that allows you to kind of weather life's storms without completely falling apart.
And the source actually outlines 4 techniques to help cultivate that resilience. The first one is self-reflection. Why do you think that's such an important starting point?
Because before you can change anything, you need to understand where your sensitivity is coming from. You know, what are the underlying beliefs or experiences that are driving it? What are your triggers? Once you have a better understanding of yourself, then you can start to develop strategies for managing your emotions more effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like open communication would kind of go hand in hand with that.
Absolutely. Talking to trusted friends or family members or even a therapist
All right.
can help you process your emotions and gain new perspectives. And it also helps to reduce those feelings of isolation that so often come with being overly sensitive.
So it's not about bottling everything up and trying to handle it all on your own. It's about reaching out for support and letting people in.
Right. And speaking of letting things go, the third technique the source mentions is all about managing expectations.
Which is something I think we all struggle with from time to time.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own hopes and dreams
Hmm.
and then feel crushed when things don't go exactly as planned.
It is. And the
Mhm.
source actually makes a really great point about how the higher your expectations are, the harder the fall.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
learning to set realistic goals and accept that things won't always be perfect,
Right.
that's crucial for protecting your emotional well-being.
And this whole idea of managing expectations really ties into the fourth technique, self-improvement. Because the more confident and secure you feel in yourself, the less likely you are to be thrown off balance by external events.
Yeah, it's like you're building up this inner reserve of strength and wisdom
Mm.
that allows you to handle whatever life throws your way.
Yeah.
And that can involve all sorts of things.
Mm.
Reading, learning new skills, pursuing your passions, taking care of your physical and mental health.
It's basically about investing in yourself and becoming the best version of you.
Mhm.
And the source argues that as you grow and evolve, you'll naturally develop a greater sense of understanding and acceptance,
Mhm.
which ultimately lessens that glass heart tendency.
It's like you're moving away from that fragile, easily shattered state
Right.
and towards something more solid and resilient.
And that resilience is what allows you to experience the world more fully
Yeah,
without being constantly overwhelmed by it.
exactly.
That's such a great way to put it. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the 10 signs of a glass heart and 4 techniques for cultivating resilience. I'm curious what's resonating most with you so far. Is there anything that's really standing out or sparking your own reflections?
It's funny, as we're talking about these techniques,
Hmm.
it made me realize self-improvement is something I often put on the back burner.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in just like the daily grind
Right.
and forget to prioritize your own personal growth.
Absolutely. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah. But the source really emphasizes that self-improvement isn't just about like adding another item to your to-do list.
Right.
It's about cultivating this deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you.
Yeah.
And that in turn can actually make you less reactive and more resilient to those everyday stressors.
It's like you're building a stronger foundation so that little bumps in the road don't feel like earthquakes.
Exactly.
Mm.
And they also point out something really interesting. They say when you focus on self-improvement, you naturally start to attract people who appreciate you for who you are.
I love that.
Glass heart and all.
No, because it's not about trying to change who you are at your core.
Right.
It's about developing healthy coping mechanisms so that your sensitivity doesn't hold you back from actually experiencing life fully.
Yeah, and that brings us to this really thought-provoking quote from the source.
Okay.
They say, when you wear a mask to face the world, you'll miss the people who truly appreciate you.
Wow. That's powerful.
It really makes you think about how trying to hide our vulnerability can actually prevent us from forming those genuine connections.
It does, and it raises the question, how do you balance authenticity with self-protection?
Right.
How do we embrace our sensitivity without letting it become a source of constant pain and frustration?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is, and I honestly don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But it seems like the source is suggesting that it's about finding that sweet spot,
Yeah.
between acknowledging our glass heart tendencies, but also actively working to cultivate those inner resources that allow us to navigate the world with a little bit more grace and resilience.
And resilience isn't something you achieve overnight.
Right.
It's a journey,
Yeah.
a process of continuous learning and growth.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of fascinating ground today. We've explored the concept of glass heart, its potential pitfalls, and the empowering steps we can take to build resilience.
I agree. It's been a really great conversation.
As always, thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Of course.
And to all of you listening, we would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
How does this concept of glass heart resonate with your own experiences? What strategies do you use to cultivate resilience in your own life? Keep exploring this fascinating concept. You might be surprised at what you discover.